So hello all, I'm John Hoffman, and today we're going to speak to Dave MacKenzie of Hortec in Michigan. We're going to discuss his new plant, Andropogon gerardii, Karl's cousin. Dave's been working on breeding native grasses for many, many years, and we're lucky enough to have them available to you in the future. So anyway, off we go with Dave. So Dave, thanks for being with us today. If you wouldn't mind, could you tell us what's involved with selecting a new grass?
Well, it depends on whether you're selecting them from a natural setting or from deliberate breeding. From natural settings, there's still a lot of opportunity. I'm sure there always will be to find plants that are different. If you're walking through a colony of little bluestem or big bluestem or panicum, you're always going to see things that are different than, say, the typical species. So just having a keen eye and getting out in nature can reveal some things. And then you can approach it by either taking a division from that plant or collecting seed from it to see what you'll get. When it comes to deliberate breeding, what we're doing typically is we're looking for the blending of characteristics that we like. So we may have one plant that has a desirable height or growth habit, but we have some other color that we would like to introduce into that growth habit. So we would cross-pollinate those plants, collect the seeds, stratify it, germinate it, and then plant them out. And that process, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It takes about a year. And then we just watch. And it takes a good 2-3 years before we really start to close attention and really hone in on the characteristics of the plant. We have to give it time to mature. Once we see things that are looking promising, we'll either transplant those into an area where we've got, the most promising plants all kind of collected together, or we'll just mark the plant, let them continue to grow. It's painstaking, time consuming. Once we have something that we like, it may be another 3 years before we're at a point where we feel that we can make a decision about introducing that plant. During that time, we'll do some propagation trials and just kind of put the plant through its paces and compare it to other plants that we have more experience with.
And how about Karl's cousin? What was the process there?
I was driving down the road going to up north fishing, and it was distinct enough that I spotted it going about 55 miles an hour.
Wow.
So pulled over, backed up, took a couple divisions, brought it here, put it in our trial garden and watched it for a couple years.
Okay. I think that's called a 55-mile-an-hour plant, isn't it? Yeah, I've heard that
There is,
before.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. So again, can you give us features? Why does Karl's cousin stand out amongst the others?
Well, here in Michigan, the typical species is prone to flopping over in
Ah,
strong wind or after a rainstorm. When I saw this plant, it was later in the season. It was standing straight, almost straight up like Karl Forster, Calamagrostis. And you're probably going to ask me how it got its name. Well,
that was the next
I've
question.
probably gotten ahead of things here, but it has that likeness to it. And I wasn't the one that suggested the name. It was another friend of mine that's a horticulturist that saw it. He looked at it and he said, "That's the Karl Forster of Big Bluestem."
How about that? Okay, we were wondering how that happened. It all made sense, especially with the K and the Karl. So it
Yeah.
did make sense. Well, good for you. It's very exciting. Again, I take it you do like the uprightness in the landscape with this plant. What about fall colors and so on?
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at some plants. I've got some pictures here. Beginning in the springtime, the plant comes up nice clear green, really looking like more or less like the typical species. It emerges fairly early from the ground. And then when we get into the summer season, got another picture of that. It blooms relatively early. You can see the foliage is still green here, purplish hues in the stems. You can see the upright characteristic of it. The foliage reaches a height of maybe 3 feet. And then as the stems elongate, they'll reach 5.5, maybe 6 feet tall. In the fall, it picks up kind of a purplish color, and it carries its leaves quite well. One of the Achilles heels of big bluestem is it likes to shed its leaves maybe earlier than some grasses,
Hmm.
starting at the bottom. This does that, but not to the extent of the straight species. Now, what really caught my eye, as I mentioned before, is the upright habit of this plant. What we often see, almost always see with little bluestem, as we get into windier, wetter weather in the fall, the plants will more or less shatter. Uh, the leaves fall apart, they peel off the bottom. Very often the plants flop over. And, in a natural area, that's well and good. In a landscape setting, that's not what people are looking for.
Of
They
course.
want their plants to hold together and have nice, predictable, upright habit, or um, the last thing they want to see happen is for them just to flop over and lay on the
Hmm.
ground.
Right.
So that's the key thing with this plant. It has stiffness to it. It stays upright. It tolerates wind, and it tolerates driving rain. And for that reason, it's a good plant. It's also the reason why I like this as a gateway to other plants, because when we take this, we can introduce these genetics into other colors, other forms of big bluestem. We're always going to be selecting for plants that maintain their characteristics late into the season. So anytime we see something flop over, we get rid of it right away.
Okay. That
And
certainly makes sense.
yeah, mhm.
Very good. Thank you for that. The pictures were good, and it's great to see the fall color. It's wonderful that it stands straight up all the time. That's terrific. All right, so we're going to have growers out there, and there are growers listening as we speak. Um, are there growing? Is there growing advice for them? Well-drained soils. You know the
Yeah.
questions. So
Yeah, well-drained soils, that oftentimes we see the best performance with plants in cultivation when we try to mimic what happens in nature. And in nature, these are plants that like well-drained soils. They have strong root systems that go really deep. They're quite drought tolerant. So in a container, probably the worst thing you can do is overwater them,
yes.
especially during the winter time. So you want to keep them on the dry side in the winter time, water them very sparingly, and then ramp that up as they start to push growth in the springtime.
Okay. Very good. Good to know. Of course, I've been lucky enough to see your trial gardens. You do have many more native grasses in the pipeline. Uh, is there anything out there we can look for in the future? You've got, are you seeing more promise with the gerardii?
We are, yeah, we've got a number of them that we're watching that, we've been selecting for upright characteristics. I mean, universally, that's kind of the bottom line. They have to stay upright. But we're looking at different heights that range from, say, 2.5, 3 feet tall, maximum height, up to 12, maybe even 14 feet tall, really tall ones that do stay upright. Now, that's the amazing thing about them. We're also looking at color in the stem, and this is really quite
Yes.
fascinating. we're seeing colors that range from canary yellow to gold to blue, scarlet, and sometimes in combination.
Wow, terrific.
Yeah,
That could
so
be striking in a landscape.
I think so.
That's great. That's very good to hear. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
I take it you're looking at other genera out there also?
We are. We're we're doing some work with panicums and a little bit with Cecilaria and little bluestem, Schizocurium. We here in Michigan have a lot of native stands of panicum and little bluestem. What's fascinating about that, especially the little bluestem, you can walk through a field, see a million plants, they'll all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be almost no variation. But equally fascinating is when you do have a plant that's different, you might have to acquire that from outside of your region. Once you start to do breeding with those, it's amazing how that's a key that unlocks all sorts of different things, different colors, blending of colors, growth habits, very big differences in height a lot of times. And we're doing the same thing with panicum, and we're seeing something similar where there's sort of a general expectation as to how Panicum virgatum looks here in West Michigan. You really don't see a tremendous amount of variation, but when you do stumble across something or you acquire something that's different, it can have really fascinating um, offspring.
Mm-hmm.
And with Panicum, same thing as with the big bluestem, we're seeing that, you know, we have plants that range from, say, maybe 2 feet tall in base shape to 12, 13 feet tall,
Wow.
and different colors and really different forms too. Everything from something that's, you know, round like a tumbleweed to something it's super tight and it looks like a pole almost. So I find it fascinating. It's really kind of, you know, you look forward to spring and summer even more because it's like, you know, a scavenger hunt or something. You just don't know what you're going to stumble upon each time.
Well, that's amazing. The size difference that you're seeing.
Yeah.
You're saying 2 to 12 feet. There's so much room in there, so much variety to choose from. I'm sure the colors are there, and the plume, I'm sure it can be heavy or light or different seed head colors and so on. So
Yeah.
we've certainly seen that throughout the industry with new plants coming out. So, well, it's great that you're doing all that work. We certainly appreciate you doing that and involving us.
Yeah.
I know you do send us some of your trial plants to check out in the deep South, which needs to happen. You realize that, which is wonderful. And again, we're just thrilled that we can be part of the trialing process and, you know, again, have access to these plants once you decide where we're going to go with them. So, but
well, we're very fortunate to be working with you. You're a great supplier for us. I've known you for a long time, John, and I'd say that as far as respected people in the industry, you're right at the top of the list.
well, thank you for that. We appreciate it. Again, Dave, thanks for this conversation. I know our viewers have learned something today, and hopefully we'll be pushing a lot more Karl's cousin out the door for you. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, John Hoffman here again. David and I are hosting this little event today, at least for the next several minutes. And we're lucky enough to have Dave MacKenzie join us. We coaxed him into joining us to answer more questions if you've got them. So again, Dave, thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. We saw the video. I think it went well, I hope. I hope everybody learned something. As we know, it's a great plant, great color in the landscape. Good solid vertical for the landscape, mass plantings. I can certainly see that.
Just had a question from John Friel. He said he missed a bit of the Karl's cousin description and asked if we could go over the specs again, from including height and fall color and things
Okay,
like that.
very good. Thank you, John, for that. Dave, you want to take it over?
Sure, yeah. So the plant in the springtime, it comes up kind of a clear green color, and it's kind of broad initially with just a lot of density to the leaves at the base. And then as the season progresses, it starts to put up central floral stems. And that's the defining characteristic of the plant, is that those stems tend to be very, very tight together and very upright in habit. They don't really um, uh, uh, have any kind of vase-shaped quality to them. Initially, it's really quite straight up. And then in time, what happens is they continue to elongate, and eventually they become about 6 feet tall. So the foliage matures to about 3 feet, and then the floral stems will reach about 6 feet. And as the season progresses, the plant starts to become more of kind of a maroonish purple color. First, you see it in the stems, and then it eventually infuses the leaves also. And it carries itself that way well into the fall season. And then, like other plants within the species, it starts to shed its bottom leaves first before it goes fully dormant.
Very good. When it comes to designing, landscape architects, contractors, designers, and there may be some watching this event here. I imagine they could be we plant them in mass plantings, maybe 4 to 6 foot centers for the fullest effect. Again, we don't expect any shattering or flopping with this particular plant.
I've got another question for you, Dave. It says, what do you recommend for overwintering protocols as far as poly blanket or fabric, watering, etc.?
Yeah. Now, I can comment on that based on our experience here in Michigan. What we found that works well is we overwinter them in the greenhouse. We haven't been real successful in containers overwintering outdoors with most of the grasses. So these are kept indoors. I think the biggest thing that comes from that is control of temperature, and maybe more importantly, moisture. Temperature wise, we don't heat them hardly at all. We get, our typical winter weather is between 20 and 30 degrees. We would heat the greenhouses to about 28 degrees, which means that the furnaces aren't running very often. We're trying to kind of keep them close to the freezing mark to avoid big swings in temperature or phase changes. But the most important thing, I think, is water management. And our growers, over the course of time and trial and error, have kind of found the sweet spot in terms of keeping the plant sufficiently moist, but not overly moist. And I guess from the standpoint of me, as somebody that doesn't water the plants on a regular basis, I would think that most people would be horrified at how dry we keep them during the winter time. I look at them and think, oh my gosh, that's not keeping that on the dry side. That's keeping it bone dry almost. But that really is the key to successful overwintering. We have a tendency to want to pick up a hose when we see dry soil, no matter what time of year it is. And it takes an experienced grower to have the discipline and the knowledge to know that that's really not doing the plant any favor in the winter time. So we keep them very dry, and then we have to be sensitive to when they would start to push growth. So in the greenhouse, we would start to look for that in March. as our days start to become more sunny and temperatures warm and day length increases, that's when we'll start to gradually introduce more moisture into the containers and the soil. And we have to really parallel the season as we do that. We can't just go from 0 to 60. We have to gradually start to water them.
And with gerardii being native throughout most of the United States, it goes through a lot, in the landscape, it goes through a lot of different conditions, extreme wet, extreme dry, and so on. So I imagine, I know in the nursery setting, it's always different. It sounds like bone dry is very close to being where we want to be on taking care of these plants. So good, thank you for that.
Got another question from Dominic Sather. What other genera of grasses would be good growing companions?
Well, certainly the things that we would see with this plant naturally. So little bluestem, of course, we would look for that. Panicum, and certainly, we see with the varying habitat, there might be other grass-like plants, like some sedges might be seen in association with them. Here we have dune ecology, and so we might see something like some of our dune species, like Ammophila breviligulata, that could potentially overlap, or Kelmovilfa longifolia. That's a possibility. I believe a native Kelmagrostis that we might see sharing the same space here too.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Dave, what about fertilization, especially in the landscape? Well, again, we may have some designers and LAs on here. Down here, we actually don't recommend fertilizing in the landscape in the springtime, just knowing the plants will push fast and potentially flop. So I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, or you could do a light fertilization in the springtime and then back off for the rest of the year.
Yeah, these plants do well in nature without being fertilized.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough, I think, recycling of nutrients and enough nutrition that comes with the rainwater to sustain them. If you had asked me this question a couple of years ago, I'd probably recommend some formulation of Osmocote. But I'm becoming more and more an advocate of very little, if any, added nutrition. Of course, if the plants are being trimmed off and hauled away, then you're depriving that soil of the natural recycling of nutrients. So, and that's probably going to be the case in a lot of landscapes. So I would think, just a light amount of fertilization would be all that's needed. Since we did that original recording, and what really caught my attention was the high end of the height of these grasses that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I might have been a little bit, must have been feeling short on the day when we talked last time, because I think that probably overestimated them a little bit. I don't think we're seeing them go up quite to 12 or 14 feet, but it's probably more like 8 to 10 feet.
Okay.
And but I also think that part of that is because I've got a guy on my staff that is pretty liberal about fertilizing. And I think he hit them pretty hard last year, and they got relatively tall. But the other thing is when you fertilize a grass too much, you make it soft and you make it prone to flopping over.
Yes.
And then you can also, you can certainly overwater these things in the landscape. I don't think they need a lot of added irrigation. Of course, it depends on the climate and the year you're having, but you can certainly overwater them and make them soft and take away the benefits that you've been trying to breed into those plants.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, good. Thank you for that.
I've got another question here about cutting back, both when you would cut it back and how far down.
I generally like to do that in the springtime before they begin to start pushing growth. So late winter, early spring. And then in the landscape, I would advocate leaving them up as long as possible. And if it works, leave them up until the following spring. There's a certain habitat aspect to it, seed value for birds, place to perch. Some of the plant might begin decomposition, and there's less that you'd have to haul away. But also, I think it's healthier for the plant. In general, I would advocate anything that parallels nature. So if in nature, there's not something coming along to trim them down in the fall, I would naturally think that that's better for the plant not to touch it until it would naturally start to shed its stems or leaves.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
I got a question. How does this plant stand up to wind?
It stands up well, and really that's how we selected it, was based on its ability to stand up. We've gotten good value out of that genetic characteristic by crossbreeding this with other forms of big bluestem. And I think, that's the exciting thing to me. I certainly like this plant. It's a great plant. But it also, I think, is a gateway plant to other plants that stand up well to wind.
Someone asked earlier about which grasses grow well with Karl's cousin. Could you elaborate on a handful of perennials, actual perennials that would work with the plant?
Oh yeah, there's lots of them. I think, we would naturally gravitate toward things that are maybe comfortable in terms of sharing the same habitat, or things that we would anticipate seeing with it in nature. So, I'd be thinking about things like liatris or rudbeckia, coneflowers. Those are going to be very comfortable companions. But it certainly wouldn't be a case where it's limited to just those things that you'd see in nature. I mean, you could expect to see it with the daylily or garden phlox or a rose. All of those things would be complementary.
Well, Dave, it looks like I think Shannon's about to cut us off here. Our time is done.
Yeah.
So again, I wanted to thank you. Hoffman Nursery would like to thank you for joining us today and answering questions to our viewers. And of course, I want to thank the viewers for showing up today. So again, Shannon, I think you have some things to say, and I'll be quiet.
Okay. Thank you. Well, yes, I will echo John and say thank you so much, Dave MacKenzie, for joining us today and for recording the video. We're very excited about having Karl's cousin now in our plant lineup. So you can get more information about that on our website. We have a full web profile up. Thank you to everyone. We were so glad to see you here, and please join us again.